A blood-curdling scream cuts through the suffocating silence of the night, echoing like a cry for help in an empty house. James froze, his hand hovering over the door handle, unable to move. The voice, it called his name, but he hadn't heard it in years. His breath caught in his chest as shadows danced across the walls. His heart raced, beating in his throat as he pushed the door open, step by step, to face whatever horrors awaited. The house had never felt so alive, alive with malice, with a purpose, and with a single name. His. He couldn't escape it. There was no running from the nightmare. It had found him. James' heart raced as the house seemed to pulse with life, its creaks and groans intensifying with each step. The whispers, faint at first, became clearer, his name being called over and over again, a voice he thought he'd left behind years ago. "I'm not going crazy," he whispered, trying to convince himself as he moved forward. The air grew colder. The shadows seemed to stretch longer, and he could feel an overwhelming presence closing in on him. He stopped in front of an old wooden door, hesitating for a moment. Every fiber of his being screamed to turn back, but he knew he couldn't. The house was waiting for him, and it knew his name. The whispers intensified, urging him onward. He had to face what was coming, whatever it was. James' fingers trembled as they brushed over the cold, weathered doorknob. He felt as though the house itself was watching him, waiting for him to make his next move. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, trying to steady his breathing, but the voice, that voice, continued to call his name, growing louder with every passing second. The door creaked open slowly, the sound like nails on a chalkboard, as James stepped inside. The room was dark, its corners swallowed by shadows. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind him. Panic surged through him as he realized that there was no way out. The whispers swirled around him so close now, he could almost feel them against his skin. The house had trapped him, and he had nowhere to hide. James could hear it now, the distinct sound of footsteps behind him. They were faint at first, like a whisper of movement, but as he turned to look, they grew louder. His body tensed, every nerve on edge. He spun around, but no one was there. The room was empty, save for the dust-covered furniture and the creeping shadows. He reached for the flashlight again, the beam of light shaking as he scanned the room, but nothing. His heart thudded in his chest as the footsteps stopped, but the air grew heavier, as if the house itself was closing in. James' breathing became shallow. He knew he wasn't alone. Something was here with him, something that moved in the darkness, always just out of reach. The silence now felt more suffocating than ever. James' mind raced as he stumbled backward, his hand grasping for support. He knew he had to leave, but the house seemed to have other plans. The walls began to close in, the darkness thickening around him. Suddenly the whispers became a chorus, filling the room, each voice growing more desperate and frantic. "Leave now," one voice cried, "or never leave at all." The door in front of him seemed to shimmer, as if it were alive, pulsing with an energy he couldn't comprehend. He ran for it, but just as his fingers brushed against the door handle, it slammed shut, trapping him inside once more. The house wasn't letting him go. It had chosen him. He could feel it, the cold grip of whatever force was pulling him deeper into the nightmare. There was no escape. James was trapped in the house, the walls pressing in on him, the whispers growing louder. His mind raced, the questions swirling. Why was he here? How had the house known him so well? His fingers trembled as he reached for the door, the very door that had once been his escape. But as his hand hovered over the doorknob, the memories began to resurface. He remembered the house from his childhood, the laughter of his family, the warmth, and the comfort. But then, something had shifted. A shadow had crept in, and the warmth faded, replaced by an overwhelming sense of dread. He hadn't wanted to remember it, but the house forced him to. The house had always known his name, and now it was ready to show him why. The darkness had always been there, lurking, waiting for him to return. But now, there was no turning back. James stumbled back, his mind racing. The house had begun to shift around him. The walls seemed to move, closing in, tightening with every breath he took. The whispers grew more frantic. urging him to listen, urging him to understand. "It's not over," the voice hissed. "You've never left." He tried to ignore it, tried to block it out, but the house was relentless. The floorboards creaked beneath his feet, as though something was moving underneath them, watching him. The whispers continued, growing louder and more insistent. The house was alive, and it knew him. It knew everything about him. "It's waiting," the voice murmured, "waiting for you to remember." He gripped his head, trying to shake the memories free, but the more he struggled, the more they came. This house had been a prison before, and now it had returned to claim him. James' breath quickened as he stumbled into the kitchen, hoping to find something, anything, that could explain the horrors he was experiencing. The house seemed to pulse with energy, every creak and groan vibrating through his body. He couldn't take it anymore. He had to get out. But when he reached the back door, it was locked, the key nowhere to be found. Panic set in. He turned around and saw a figure standing in the doorway, obscured by shadows. The faintest glimmer of recognition passed through his mind, but it was gone too quickly for him to grasp. "Who are you?" he whispered, his voice trembling. The figure didn't answer. It only watched him, unmoving, waiting. His heart raced, and for the first time, he realized he wasn't alone in this house. Something was with him, something that knew the house as well as he did. James turned back toward the shadowy figure, his eyes wide with fear. "Who are you?" he repeated, his voice shaky. The figure took a step forward, and in the dim light, James could make out a faint outline, a figure he didn't recognize, yet somehow he felt a sense of familiarity. "I should have never left," the figure whispered, its voice barely audible. "The house, it never forgets." James stepped back, his heart pounding in his chest. The figure's words echoed in his mind. The house. It was more than just a building. It was a force, a presence that never let go, that clung to those who entered, never releasing its grip. The figure stepped closer, and for a moment their eyes locked. James saw something in them, something dark and ancient. The figure spoke again, its voice colder this time. "You're not safe here. You've never been safe here." The figure's words haunted James as he fled through the house, the darkness swallowing him whole. His breath was ragged, his heart racing. He couldn't think. He just had to get out. But the house had other plans. Every door he tried to open was locked. Every window was sealed shut. The whispers began again, louder now, growing into a maddening chorus of voices. "It's your fault," they hissed. "You're the one who brought it back." James' mind spun. He hadn't meant for any of this to happen. He had just wanted to escape, to forget. But the house wouldn't let him. The air grew colder still, and the house seemed to come alive, its walls shifting, its floors creaking as though something was moving within it. He could feel it closing in on him, the house tightening its grip. There was no escape. The house had claimed him, body and soul. James stumbled into the basement, his heart racing as the house seemed to breathe around him. The air was thick with the scent of dampness and decay. The only sound was the faint drip of water echoing in the distance. His flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move on their own. He could feel the weight of the house bearing down on him. "I'm not alone," he whispered, his voice barely audible in the suffocating darkness. The walls seemed to pulse with energy, as if the house itself was alive, feeding off his fear. He moved deeper into the basement, each step creaking loudly beneath his feet. A faint whisper brushed against his ear. He froze, his blood running cold. "James!" The voice called, and he knew in that moment, with terrifying certainty, that he was no longer in control. The house had claimed him, and it wasn't going to let him go. James continued to explore the basement, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He could feel the presence of something watching him. The walls seemed to close in with every step he took, and the air grew colder, colder than he had ever felt before. Then he saw it, an old, weathered diary, hidden beneath a pile of rotting books. The cover was cracked, the pages yellowed with age. He reached for it, his hand trembling as he opened it. The words inside were smudged and faded, but he could make out a few names, all written in a spidery script. His name was among them. He read the pages, his heart pounding in his chest. The house had a history, a dark history, one that was now tied to him. The more he read, the more he understood. He had never truly escaped. The house had always known him, and it had been waiting for his return. As James read the final page of the diary, the temperature in the room dropped sharply. He looked around, feeling as though the walls themselves were closing in on him. A sudden crash from behind made him whirl around, his heart leaping into his throat. But there was nothing there, just the darkness and the shadows. But then he heard it, the sound of footsteps. Not his own, but someone else. He looked down the hallway, but it was empty. The footsteps grew louder, closer. "Who's there?" he called, his voice shaky. But the house offered no answer. Then the lights flickered, and in the brief moment of darkness, the figure appeared, standing at the end of the hallway, motionless. Its presence was suffocating, the air thick with malevolent energy. James could feel it, the presence that had been haunting him all along. The house had finally shown its true form. The figure in the hallway remained motionless, its outline barely visible in the flickering light. James' heart raced as he took a step back, his body frozen in terror. The footsteps were getting louder, closer, but the figure remained silent, watching him. "What do you want?" James asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The figure didn't respond. It just stood there watching him. And then, suddenly, it moved. In an instant, it was in front of him, its face obscured by the shadows. James stepped back, his breath catching in his throat. He could feel the coldness of its presence, an unnatural chill that seeped into his bones. The figure reached out, its hand stretching toward him. "You should have never returned," the figure whispered, its voice barely audible over the sound of James' racing heart. And in that moment, James realized the truth. The house had been waiting for him. It had always been waiting. The figure's hand reached out to touch James, but he recoiled, stumbling backward. His mind raced, his instincts screaming at him to run. But there was nowhere to go. The house had him, and it wasn't letting go. The figure stood in front of him, its presence overwhelming, as if it were the embodiment of the house itself. "Leave me alone," James shouted, his voice breaking. But the figure remained silent, its dark presence surrounding him, pressing in on him from all sides. The house seemed to pulse with an eerie energy, the walls breathing, the air thick with dread. The whispers began again, louder than ever, urging him to remember, to accept the truth. James' hands shook as he tried to back away, but the figure stepped forward, its face still hidden in shadow. He had no choice now. He was trapped, and there was nothing he could do to escape. James staggered away from the figure, his breath shallow, his mind reeling from the encounter. He turned, desperate to escape, but the hallway before him seemed to stretch on endlessly. The house was no longer just a building. It had become a labyrinth, a maze designed to trap him within its walls. As he moved down the corridor, the whispers followed, each word more insistent than the last. "It's too late, James. You can't escape." The walls seemed to close in, and every door he opened led him deeper into the nightmare. His legs were weak, and the exhaustion was starting to take its toll. His thoughts blurred. Was this really happening? Or was he losing his mind? He could feel the house breathing, its pulse a steady thrum beneath his feet. "I won't let you go," the voice whispered again. And James understood. He wasn't in control anymore. The house was. Suddenly, a door at the end of the hallway creaked open. James froze, his heart hammering in his chest. The whispers had stopped, and an eerie silence settled over the house. He wasn't sure whether to move forward or turn and run in the opposite direction. Something in the back of his mind told him that whatever lay behind that door would change everything. Reluctantly, he stepped toward it, each step feeling heavier than the last. As he approached, the door swung open of its own accord, revealing a dark, empty room. But when James stepped inside, the air shifted. He felt a cold hand brush against his back, a presence, but when he spun around, there was no one there. His body went cold with fear. He wasn't alone, and the house wasn't finished with him yet. The walls were now alive, pulsing with energy, as if reacting to his every move. James stepped further into the room, his flashlight flickering erratically. The air grew colder with every step, and his heart pounded in his chest. He scanned the room, but there was nothing. Just shadows and darkness. He felt a pressure in the air, an almost suffocating presence that seemed to watch him, wait for him to make the next move. Suddenly, the floor beneath him creaked, and a low, guttural voice whispered from the shadows, "Welcome home." James' blood ran cold. The voice was familiar, but he couldn't place it. The ground beneath him trembled, as if the house itself was alive, reacting to his presence. He turned, panic flooding through him, but there was no way out. The door had vanished. The house had sealed him inside, trapping him in its dark, suffocating grasp. "You can't leave," the voice hissed, and James realized then that the house wasn't just a building. It was a prison, and he was its captive. James frantically searched the room, his mind racing as he tried to find some way out. But every corner, every possible exit was blocked. It was as if the house had swallowed him whole. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, until they seemed to fill his mind, drowning out all other thoughts. "You can't escape," they repeated. "You belong to us now." The words sent a chill down his spine. He slammed his fists against the walls, but they felt unnaturally solid, unyielding. The air thickened, and the temperature dropped further. His breath came out in sharp bursts, visible in the frigid air. The house was playing with him, toying with his desperation. It had him cornered, and there was no escape. No one was coming to help him. He was alone, trapped, and the house was hungry. Just as James was about to give in to the crushing despair, the whispers stopped. The silence was deafening, and for a moment he thought he might be free. But then a figure appeared in the doorway. It was the same figure from before, the one that had been watching him. Only now, it wasn't just a shadow. It was real, solid, and it was walking toward him, its steps slow but purposeful. James' heart pounded in his chest. "Who are you?" he demanded, but the figure didn't respond. It only kept walking closer, its eyes locked on him. James backed away, his body trembling, but the figure didn't stop. It reached out, its cold fingers brushing against his cheek, sending a shock through his body. And then, it whispered, "You should have stayed away." The figure stepped closer, and James knew it was too late. He had crossed the point of no return. James stumbled backward, the cold touch of the figure still lingering on his skin. He could feel the house tightening around him, suffocating him, its presence overwhelming. "You should have stayed away," the figure whispered again, its voice cold and hollow, as if it came from deep within the house itself. James tried to steady his breathing, his heart pounding in his chest. He needed to escape. He needed to get out of this nightmare. But every door he tried was sealed shut. The windows were nothing more than solid walls. The house was alive, breathing around him, its walls closing in. He wasn't sure if it was the house or the figure that had trapped him here, but he knew one thing: it wanted him. And no matter how hard he tried, there was no escape. It was as if the house itself was feeding on his fear. With every breath, James felt the walls of the house grow tighter, as if it were physically pressing down on him. He turned toward the figure, its eyes locked on him, its expression unreadable. "What do you want from me?" James cried, his voice breaking. The figure didn't answer. Instead, it took another slow step forward, its movements deliberate, its presence oppressive. James could feel the cold air closing in, his own fear rising as the figure drew nearer. His mind raced. There had to be something he was missing, some way to break free from this nightmare. He thought of the diary, the house's dark history. He had to face whatever it was that had brought him here. He couldn't keep running. But as the figure took another step, a low growl echoed from the walls, and James realized with a chill of realization that there was no way out. The house had claimed him, and he was its prisoner. James' chest tightened as the figure advanced, its cold gaze never leaving him. "I won't give in," he whispered, trying to summon any ounce of strength he had left. His body felt numb, his muscles weak from fear and exhaustion, but he refused to back down. The figure reached out again, its hand cold and unnervingly close. James jerked away, stumbling back toward the center of the room. "You can't control me," he shouted, but the figure remained silent, its presence suffocating. The whispers grew louder, more frantic. "You belong to us," they hissed. "You always have." James clenched his fists, his body trembling with a mix of fear and defiance. He wasn't going to let the house win. He wasn't going to let it break him. But deep down he knew he was running out of time. The figure's hand brushed against James' arm, sending a jolt of ice through his veins. He gasped, his breath ragged and shallow. The air was thick, and the shadows seemed to wrap around him, holding him in place. "You cannot fight what you cannot see," the figure said, its voice low and unsettling. "The house is you. You will always be a part of it." The words sank deep into James' mind, and for a moment he doubted himself. Had he truly escaped the house? Or had it followed him, waiting for the right moment to bring him back? The whispers intensified, swirling around him like a whirlwind. "You can't run from yourself," they echoed. James' knees buckled, and he collapsed onto the floor, his body trembling with terror. The figure loomed over him, its face still obscured by shadow, its presence suffocating. He realized with sickening clarity that there was no escape. The house had claimed him, body, mind, and soul. James' mind raced as he lay on the floor, his body racked with fear and despair. He had nothing left to fight with. The house had won. But just as he thought he might lose himself completely, a new sound cut through the darkness, a faint, distant thud, like a heartbeat, steady and rhythmic. James' eyes snapped open, his heart pounding in his chest. The house was not finished. There was something more, something he hadn't yet discovered. With a last surge of willpower, James pushed himself to his feet. His legs shook beneath him, but he stood, facing the figure. "I will never be a part of you," he said through gritted teeth. The figure remained silent, its form growing more indistinct, its presence fading. As James took a step toward it, the walls of the room began to crack, the house seeming to tremble as if it were alive. And in that moment, James understood. The house was breaking, and he was the key. The house groaned as if it were alive, its walls trembling, cracks spiderwebbing across the floor. James could feel it. The house was weakening, unraveling beneath his feet. Every step he took caused the ground to shake, and the air around him seemed to thicken, growing heavier. The figure was no longer in front of him, but the presence still loomed, suffocating him with its malevolent energy. "You cannot escape what you are," a voice hissed from somewhere in the shadows. James staggered forward, his legs weak, but his resolve was stronger than ever. The house had tried to break him, but now it was falling apart. "I'm not you," he whispered to the darkness, "and I will never be." But even as the words left his lips, the house seemed to push back, its walls groaning louder, almost as if it were fighting him. The whispers returned, but now they were frantic, pleading with him to stop. He could feel the end approaching, but he knew he had no choice but to keep moving forward. James moved through the house with purpose now, the confusion and fear giving way to an overwhelming sense of urgency. He could feel the walls closing in, but the destruction of the house seemed to push him forward, guiding him towards something he couldn't yet understand. Every creak, every tremor, was like a warning, telling him that time was running out. As he walked through the hallway, something caught his eye, a mirror that hadn't been there before. He hesitated, his reflection staring back at him, distorted and ghostly. He reached out, his hand trembling, and as soon as his fingers touched the glass, the reflection shifted. His face warped into something unrecognizable, his eyes black as coal, his features twisted with the same malevolent energy that seemed to pulse through the house. "You are me," a voice whispered from within the mirror. James recoiled, but the image remained, unblinking, unyielding. The house was not just trying to break him, It was trying to consume him entirely. James backed away from the mirror, his heart racing. The house felt like it was closing in on him, the walls pressing tighter with every passing moment. The voice in the mirror echoed in his mind. "You are me." The words repeated like a mantra, driving him mad. What did it mean? What was the house trying to show him? He stumbled down the hallway, the flickering light from his flashlight casting long eerie shadows. Each step felt like it took him deeper into the house, deeper into the nightmare. As he reached the end of the hallway, another door appeared in front of him. It wasn't there before, but now it stood open, a sliver of light shining through. He hesitated for a moment, fear gnawing at him, but then something urged him forward. The house had been waiting for him to make this choice. As he stepped toward the door, the air grew colder still, and a low, distant hum began to fill the space around him. He had no choice but to walk through it. As James stepped into the room, the door slammed shut behind him with a deafening bang. He spun around, panic rising in his chest, but the door was gone, replaced by solid, unyielding walls. The room was circular, its edges fading into shadows. In the center, a pedestal stood, holding an object, a small, weathered box. The hum he had heard grew louder, reverberating through the air like a heartbeat. He approached the pedestal cautiously, his hand shaking as he reached for the box. The moment his fingers touched it, the hum intensified, filling the room. The box creaked open, revealing a single dark stone inside. James felt a pull, a magnetic force that seemed to draw him closer to the stone. It was cold to the touch, and as soon as he held it, a surge of energy flooded through him. The house seemed to tremble, and the walls began to crack even more violently. He had found the heart of the house, and now there was no going back. The energy from the stone surged through James, and for a moment, everything around him went dark. His body felt like it was being pulled apart, stretched thin across time and space. He saw flashes of his past, his childhood, the house, the memories he had buried deep within himself. And then, as if the house itself were revealing its dark secrets, the truth hit him like a wave. The house had been built on his bloodline. His ancestors had once lived here, and they had all been drawn into its grasp. He was no different. The house was a part of him, and he was a part of it. It had always been his destiny to return. The stone in his hand pulsed, and the walls of the house began to cave in. The house was collapsing, and he was its last prisoner. James dropped to his knees, the weight of the revelation crashing down on him. There was no escape. The house had claimed him, and it would never let him go. The house was collapsing, its very foundation shaking beneath James. The walls cracked with an ear-splitting sound, and the floor trembled as though it were about to split open. The stone in his hand pulsed with an eerie, unnatural rhythm, syncing with the frantic pounding of his heart. He staggered to his feet, desperate to escape, but the air grew thick, oppressive, making every movement feel sluggish. "I am not you," he whispered, his voice breaking. The house seemed to mock him, its walls groaning and shifting, pushing him toward the center of the room where the pedestal once stood. The stone's energy grew stronger, overwhelming his senses. He could feel it. This was it. He was the last to remain. He was the final link to the house curse, and it wouldn't let him go until it had consumed every last part of him. The whispers started again, louder than ever, urging him to stay, to surrender to the house. "You are the house," they hissed. But James clenched his fist around the stone, determination burning in his chest. He wasn't going to let it win. James' heart raced as the stone pulsed in his hand, sending waves of energy through his entire body. His vision blurred, and for a brief moment, the world around him seemed to vanish into darkness. In that darkness he saw flashes of faces, his family, his ancestors, all trapped in the same cycle of torment. The house had consumed them, one by one. And now, it was his turn. But something inside him, something deep and primal, refused to accept it. He fought against the darkness, against the pull of the house. "I won't be your prisoner," he shouted, his voice echoing in the empty space. The stone in his hand burned with intensity, and the walls trembled as if the house itself could feel his defiance. For a moment, everything went silent, the energy hanging in the air like a storm waiting to break. The house screamed. It wasn't a sound, not a noise, but a presence that seemed to shake the very air around James. The walls groaned, the floor cracked, and the ground beneath him began to split. The stone in his hand pulsed violently, as if fighting against him. But James held on, his grip tightening with every surge of energy. The house tried to pull him in, but he refused to give in. "You're nothing," he said through gritted teeth. "I will destroy you." The air grew colder, and the shadows around him twisted, becoming more aggressive, trying to drag him into the darkness. But James fought back, the power of his own will pushing against the house's force. He wasn't going to let it claim him. He wasn't going to let it claim anyone ever again. The ground shook violently, and for a moment, James thought the entire house would collapse into itself. But instead of retreating, he pressed forward, pushing through the chaos. The stone burned in his hand, its power threatening to overwhelm him. He gritted his teeth, refusing to let the house win. The walls around him shattered, falling away like pieces of dust. He could feel the energy in the air growing more intense, the house's grip loosening as he fought back. The stone in his hand pulsed faster, brighter, until it became almost unbearable. Then, with one final surge of will, James slammed the stone into the ground. The house screamed once more, a final agonizing cry that seemed to shake the earth itself. And then, silence. For a moment, everything stood still. The house, the walls, the shadows, it all froze in a suffocating silence. James could feel the power of the stone fading, the grip of the house loosening as the walls crumbled to dust. The weight that had pressed down on him for so long finally lifted, and for the first time, he felt free. But as the dust settled, a new sound filled the space, the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, echoing in the silence. James turned, his heart sinking in his chest. The figure stood in the doorway once more, its form shrouded in shadow. "It's over," James whispered, but the figure didn't respond. It simply stepped forward, its presence chilling the air around him. James knew now, as the house collapsed around him, that it would never truly end. There was no escape. The house had been a part of him all along.